Most people don't realize that when you're eating broccoli, you're actually eating an unopened flower bud. It is one of the most popular vegetables out there, but we're really just munching on flowers. And in this video, I'm gonna show you how to grow your own beautiful bouquet of broccoli flowers from seed to midlife stage, all the way up to harvest. This video is gonna cover everything you need to know about growing broccoli at home. Broccoli was actually domesticated 2,600 years ago. This ancient vegetable has been around for a long time, cultivated by the Romans, and every single brassica plant that we actually eat today, from this Mizuna mustard to the broccoli in front of me, to cabbages, cauliflower, everything in between, are all related to the wild cabbage, Brassica oleracea. And the Romans were able to breed one that produced a large unopened flower bud that can then be consumed, and that is how we ended up with broccoli. Now in the United States, broccoli actually wasn't a popular vegetable up until the 1920s when some Italians immigrated over and started their very own broccoli farm in San Jose. And that's interesting because today, most of our broccoli is still produced on the Central Coast in that Monterey Bay area, where the cool climate and no extreme heat is really ideal for growing this delicious crop. So fall and springtime are generally the best seasons to grow them. Before we get into that, let's talk about some different variety options, because there are quite a few out there and they're all interesting in their own way. They could basically be split into two major groups. The first one is Calabrese. As I mentioned, that is from Italy, Calabria. And there are three main varieties that I really love to grow and grow every single year. The first one is Belstar, which can handle a lot of heat, which is why I like to grow it here in my garden. Then I've got the Checo, which is a classic heirloom, and Waltham 29, another classic. The cool thing about these varieties is that they produce the standard head of broccoli that you get at the grocery store. So that big old floret with a bunch of little stems attached, that is the Calabrese style broccoli that you're used to seeing on a day-to-day basis. Now, for me personally, I much prefer the sprouting type broccoli. In this case, I have Burgundy, which I grew last year. And let me tell you, if you want production, this is a killer. I got so much broccoli, I was handing away bouquets of broccoli florets to whoever came to my garden. The cool thing about sprouting broccoli is that instead of producing just one main head, it produces an abundance of slender stems with a little floret at the top. Now, the reason why I like this one so much more is because it handles cooking much better than the standard varieties. It won't get all mushy and soft. It holds up to high temperature roasting, and it is quite delicious. Now, there are two more plants I wanted to mention that have the name broccoli but aren't really broccoli. The first one is Kailan, which is a Chinese style. It is mostly stem and leaf with a little bit of a floret at the end. And actually this crossed with standard broccoli is where you get broccolini from. And broccolini is one of my absolute favorites. If you want a good variety, Asperbrock is one that I would recommend. The last one is broccoli Rob. It has the name broccoli. It is not broccoli whatsoever. It's actually related to the turnip. And it is honestly a very bitter, not so pleasant cousin of the broccoli plant. Some people like it. It's not my personal favorite. We're gonna set these two aside and focus on these four for our journey. So let's go ahead and get these started in these 6 cells. Whenever I start broccoli, I like to start them in cells like these 6 cells here and then transplant it into my garden. There's actually a couple different reasons for it. First of all, you usually are growing this in the springtime. So 4 to 6 weeks before your first frost, that is a transplant anyway. So you're going to be starting them in some sort of cell. And the other one is that the other time you start them is in late summer for fall. And usually that means that your summer garden is full of plants anyway. So it's not like you could direct seed them out there amongst your tomatoes and peppers. It's better to start them in cells and transplant them once that space is available. So when I'm doing broccoli, there's basically nothing special about it. It's a very common seed. It's a nice round seed, nothing too small, too big. I like to just sprinkle 2 to 3 seeds per cell, make sure they're spread out a bit so that they don't compete once they come up. And then we're going to be thinning them down to the final selection. So what I'm going to do here is go through and seed all of these, and I'll get some soil and we'll cover these up. A few things I'll mention really quick is that I started with wet soil. Broccoli is a plant that likes to stay moist. That includes the leaves, the soil itself. It doesn't really want to stay dry at any point in its lifespan. And that's just a quick little note for you guys. Now, all I have here is some nice sifted potting mix, something that's equivalent to seedling soil. I just sifted my own. You want to use a fine mix when you're covering your seeds, especially when they are smaller, like this broccoli seed, because anything that sits on top of it, like a stick, might impede its germination. So we want to sift it down, some nice fine soil. Then I'm going to water this in, set it aside, and we'll check back in a week or two when those first sprouts have emerged, and then eventually we'll get them planted out in the garden. It's been about a month since we first started all of these broccoli seeds. The good news is that all of the Burgundy have made it, so we are going to be planting all of them. But on the other front, the DeCheco, Waltham, and Belstar Only 2 of each made it, so I've consolidated them into a single tray, and now we could go ahead and plant these. When it comes to broccoli, you really want to wait for like 2 to 4 true leaves before planting them out. You could also just pot them up if it's too early or if you don't have space in your garden. They do just fine potting up and then being planted later. The one thing you do not want to do when it comes to any type of brassica is let them sit in the trays for too long. If they sit for too long, they think that they are actually older plants and they will begin to produce a flower. Even though the plant is really tiny, you'll get a tiny little bolted flower and your season's over. So never leave them for too long. Make sure you plant them out. And when it comes to finding the right space in your garden for them, you really want full sun, especially in the winter time where sun is already at a premium, it's limited. You want to find somewhere that gets plenty of sun, like this bed right here. Now, whenever I plant brassicas, I like to make sure there's plenty of fertility available in the soil, the container or the bed I'm planting in. That's why you see the surface layer here of fresh compost that I've added. I'm also going to be adding some organic, slow release fertilizer directly into the planting hole. Now, you don't have to go crazy. You could do multiple feedings throughout the season, but adding a little bit in the hole never seems to bother these plants. And in fact, they should benefit from it. So there's burgundy number 1. What I'll do here is I'll plant one of each of these varieties in this section here so we could compare them easily. All 4 broccoli are in the ground now, and we will be following these guys and doing updates regularly. Now, I want to talk a little bit about spacing here because this is quite tight. I've only given them about 12 inches apart. Ideally, you'd want 18 to 24 inches apart for traditional spacing when it comes to broccoli, but I want to keep them nice and tight so you guys could see how they grow and how they're all a little bit different. Now, it is totally fine doing them this tight. You might end up with slightly smaller heads, but you will get a overall larger amount of broccoli in the long run. Now, keep in mind, some of these will get bushy as we continuously harvest them, so it'll be really interesting to see how crowded and tight these guys get. I'm going to plant the other set of the same plants over here. I'm going to space them a little bit further apart, and we'll have a little bit of a comparison once we do that update. It's been about 8 weeks since we transplanted this broccoli in the garden, and it is looking really good. Quick caveat though, that I am growing this in true wintertime. This was planted out in December. It is February now, and they are looking really good, but they're not growing crazy fast. In spring, if you plant your broccoli, it'll grow much faster than this, so just keep that in mind. Now, for the update on the varieties, over here we have Bellstar, which is forming its first nice loose style head of broccoli. It's more akin to like a broccolini than a true heading style broccoli, which is what DiCecco is here. And this one is the furthest behind. And that's not too surprising for me. DiCecco, since it forms one major head of broccoli at the beginning, it tends to take a little bit longer for that first one to show up. Burgundy though is very far ahead. It has the first crown formed, which looks really nice, but it also has a ton of side shoots coming on the way. So that one will probably be the first to harvest. And in the back here, we have Waltham 29. It has its little head of broccoli starting to form, but overall, these plants are looking fantastic. So the next update will be when we do our first harvest, because one of the interesting things about broccoli is that it's not a just one-time harvest plant, especially depending on the variety and how you harvest it. You could really extend your broccoli harvest season quite dramatically. So I'll see you in probably 2 to 3 weeks when we harvest some of this broccoli. So it's been about a week or 2 since our last update, and it's actually time to harvest. Now, this is going to be kind of crazy because if you look at this burgundy broccoli plant in front of me, it's really not that big, but you are going to be shocked by the harvest. And there is one more harvest that we're going to do today, and I think this one was the Walthams 29. I honestly don't remember. It looks a little bit looser than it should, which makes me think that I might have accidentally planted a broccolini. And usually if I'm growing broccolini, I wouldn't let it get this tall first. I would actually chop it near the top just like this to produce more branching and more of those side shoots of broccolini florets. So this is still good eating, I'll set it aside, but today we really want to harvest this guy. So what I'm going to do here is collect this main bunch, and I'm just going to bunch them together in my hand, take my knife, cut right across. So right there is the first part of the harvest, but all of these extra side shoots here are going to add up. Now, keep in mind that it is a purple plant, a purple broccoli, but when you cook it, that color will fade and it will turn into a sort of green color again. Now that is expected, so don't freak out if that happens to your broccoli when you actually cook it. But look at this, guys. I have a true handful here. I can't even fit it in my hand. This is all from that one plant that is this small. And the real kicker here is this plant's not even done. It's actually just getting started. over the course of the next month or two, you are going to be shocked by how much broccoli this plant produces, because every one of these branches here that I've left behind, and even the branches I've cut, are now going to start to produce second, third, fourth side shoots, and it's going to be a huge bush of purple. So this is a wonderful harvest. It's going to be dinner tonight. My other ones are just around the corner here. The Checo up front here is definitely starting to form that first tight little head. So we'll check back when we get our next major harvest, and you will definitely see some progress on this one when that happens. And now it is time to finally harvest our heading broccoli, the Checo. Now, unfortunately, I missed this one by about 3 days, which is exactly how long I was gone traveling on the road, but it is still perfectly good eating. Now, the thing that I'm looking at here that's telling me I missed the window a little bit is that some of the floret is loose around the edges. Where they meet, you can see they're starting to space out a bit. So it's starting to unfurl and open. What you really want, ideally, is for really tight heads where there is no gaps, there's no looseness like this. But honestly, there is essentially no difference in the eating quality from this stage to what it looked like 3 days ago. So now what I'm going to do is come just beneath the head here. And what I want to do, again, is make sure that I leave a leaf below my cut. That's going to trigger that next set of broccoli that's going to grow. So I'm going to give it a snip. And right there, we've got ourselves a nice little head of broccoli. Now this year, I have to say that overall, not my best basket year. I am getting a decent amount of production, but the weather has been very strange. It's been extremely dry this year. It's been a little bit more warm overall. So I'm not surprised that they aren't doing as well as they could be, but I am still getting plenty of harvest. Now, the main thing I really want to tell you guys about growing a heading broccoli, or really any type of broccoli, is that this plant is not done. You do not want to remove it at this point, because right next to it, I have the exact same type of broccoli, a heading style broccoli, and I've already collected the head. So now what's happening is I'm getting all of these different side shoots that are starting to form. And now let's go ahead and harvest them and see how much broccoli that gives us. All right, guys, so there is the original head of broccoli that we harvested from this plant. And here are all the side shoots that I got from that second plant. It's roughly a third of the total volume. Now, the nice thing about this is that it's already pre-floreted. They're nice and tender. They grow quickly. And the cool thing is that that was the second harvest. This will now go on to its third harvest, and it'll have even more sites to branch from. So that third harvest will probably be bigger than the second harvest. And overall, you're definitely gonna get at least 2 heads worth of broccoli. Now, let me show you how to break down a standard head of broccoli and store it in your fridge so it can last plenty of time, giving you that confidence to cook it when you're ready. So the first thing I wanna say about storing your broccoli is that oftentimes not washing it will allow it to last longer in the fridge, unless you wash it and 100% let it fully dry before storing it. Now, I don't have the time or setup to do that. So what I do instead is I will break this down, store it, and then wash it as I need it. Now, the cool thing about broccoli is that it has all these extra florets on the outside. So one thing you could do is you could just take your knife and just tap it like that, and they will just snap off, or they'll cut all the way through. You could also just break them by hand if you want. That works perfectly fine. So you could start processing some of these outer shoots just like that. Now, once you get to the top crown, what I like to do is just get close where I get essentially every floret that's a majority floret left, and then set aside the stalk. And then now I could break out all of these individual little florets. Pretty easy to separate broccoli, honestly. I think it's worth it to do this beforehand. It's going to make it more likely that you will cook it. When I have a big floret like this that's stuck together, I'll just go to the back here, cut down the middle, and then rip it apart with my hands. And that'll give me a nice, manageable sort of single bite or 2-bite floret. So all of this is now split up. The other thing I want to mention is that you can use the stalk of your broccoli, of course. What people like to do, I'm not a big broccoli stem consumer, but if you cut it into thinner pieces like this, what you could then do is then cut it into julienne, like little matchsticks. And this can now be used in a stir fry, something like that. It's actually very crispy. And if you grow it at home through the winter, it's also quite sweet. It's actually really good. I'm actually surprised by how delicious that is. Once you have your florets processed and ready to bag, what I like to do is I will use produce bags like this. I wash and reuse them, and they do substantially increase the lifespan of your fruit or veg. So with veg, I'll get my bag, I'll start loading it up with all my florets, just like that. Now, if you stored it in the bag just as is, what can happen is condensation builds up, and that will actually break down your broccoli faster. So I suggest getting a paper towel, just a single one like this. And you could even just put this near the bottom of the bag, just like that, and that'll help soak up any moisture that condenses in this bag. And just as an example, here's actually some broccoli that I collected and stored exactly this way. You can see the little paper there. This was collected, I think it was 10 days ago. It might be a full 2 weeks, and it's looking totally fine. So it's very rigid, it's upright. It actually will still snap, so it's still crispy, perfectly fresh, stores a very long time if you do it like this. Now remember, water is the enemy, which is why that paper towel is making such a big difference. And just like that, we've grown our broccoli from seed to harvest and stored it so it could last a long time, and then we could cook something for somebody that we love. Now, if you have any other issues with growing brassicas such as broccoli, check out this video right over here, which will give you some tips on problems to avoid. But good luck in the garden. Thank you guys for watching, and keep on going.